The room felt quiet in a way that made time slow down, and the air carried a soft stillness that almost whispered to anyone who stepped inside. And on this quiet morning, Sandra Bullock sat alone near her living room window while warm daylight touched the floor like a gentle memory. She held a cup of tea in her hands, but her mind drifted far away from the present moment, and her eyes landed on a distant corner of the room where an old covered canvas leaned against the wall like a forgotten truth. She looked at it for only a second, then looked away with a deep breath that felt heavier than she expected. Keanu Reeves arrived soon after with a calm and kind smile that always made people feel safe. He had no idea that today he would notice something hidden in plain sight, something that carried a story Sandra had buried for many years. He greeted her softly and walked in with the gentle respect he always showed her. They talked for a while about simple things and laughed at small moments, but Keanu kept feeling a strange pull toward the corner near the wall. He could sense a presence there, a story waiting, a silence that did not feel empty. Finally, his eyes drifted again toward the canvas shape behind the thin cloth. The shape was tall and familiar, the kind of shape only an artist would recognize instantly. He walked closer without touching anything and spoke in a careful voice that held both curiosity and care. He asked her if she still painted sometimes. Sandra froze for a moment, then shook her head slowly. Her voice was soft but carried a quiet sadness as she said she stopped painting years ago. She said she packed everything away one night and never looked back. Keanu felt her words settle in the room like dust on an old window, but he also sensed there was more, something she had not said and maybe something she could not say yet. He did not push her for answers because he understood the weight of silence better than most people. Instead, he changed the topic gently and told her he came to help her organize some shelves in her studio storage room. Sandra agreed with a small smile, but her eyes still looked distant, like she was trying to hold something inside her heart that wanted to break free. They walked into the small studio room that once overflowed with life and color, but now felt empty and quiet like a place where dreams had been folded and stored away. Keanu carefully moved some old boxes while Sandra sorted through papers and old frames. He opened a chest at the bottom and found a small wooden box wrapped in a faded blue cloth. It looked old in a way that suggested it had been opened many times long ago, but had remained untouched in recent years. The wood had gentle marks on it that made it look personal and meaningful. He held it quietly, then looked at Sandra, as if asking for permission without speaking any words. When she saw the box in his hands, she paused with a deep breath that broke in her chest. She walked toward him and took the box gently from his hands. Her fingers shook while holding it, and for a moment she did not speak. Then she whispered that the brushes inside the box were a gift from someone she lost long ago. Her voice softened when she said she never had the strength to use them again. Keanu watched her closely but respectfully. He could feel her pain even though she did not describe it. He sensed that painting was not just a hobby for Sandra. It was a memory, a connection, a piece of her soul that she locked away because losing someone changed the meaning of every color she once loved. She placed the box gently on the table and stepped away from it. Keanu stayed quiet because he knew the room needed silence more than words. He looked around at the empty walls and tried to imagine them covered with art again. He tried to imagine a version of Sandra who painted with joy instead of carrying silent grief. He wondered how long she had lived with this weight and how many times she passed by the old covered canvas without letting herself uncover it. Keanu felt something shift inside him. He knew he could not erase her pain, but he believed he could guide her back to the part of herself she abandoned. He believed art could heal wounds that words could not reach. He believed that even a broken heart deserved to feel color again. This thought stayed with him long after they finished cleaning and sat down again in the living room. The sunlight reached the old canvas once more while they talked, and Keanu looked at it with quiet determination. He decided in that moment that he would find a way to bring her brushes back to life. He would bring her art back, not because she needed to paint for the world, but because she needed to paint for herself. He felt this purpose settle inside him like a promise he could not ignore. As Sandra walked him to the door, she said she was grateful for his help today, and Keanu replied in his calm, gentle tone that helping her always felt right. She smiled again, but this smile carried both warmth and sorrow, as if two emotions were trying to exist in the same space. Keanu noticed and stored that expression in his heart. He stepped outside, but a question stayed with him. What exactly happened the night she stopped painting? What story lived beneath the dust of her old studio? And what truth waited behind that covered canvas? These questions created a quiet suspense inside him. He knew the answers would not come easily, but he also believed he was meant to uncover them. He believed some stories needed kindness before they were willing to reveal themselves. As he walked away, he glanced back at her window and saw her standing there lost in thought. The canvas waited behind her like a silent witness. Keanu whispered to himself that he would help her reclaim the part of her heart she left behind. The journey had begun even though she did not know it yet. The day after Keanu left, Sandra tried to return to her normal routine, but something inside her felt unsettled and strangely awake. The quiet house seemed louder somehow, and every small sound echoed like a reminder of something she tried to forget. She walked past the old canvas again while heading toward the kitchen, but this time she stopped for a moment longer and stared at the thin cloth covering it. Her chest tightened as a memory surfaced, then disappeared before she could fully hold it. She turned away quickly and whispered that she was fine even though her heart felt anything but fine. Keanu, on the other hand, could not stop thinking about the wooden box and the way Sandra held it with trembling hands. He felt a sense of responsibility growing inside him, not because she asked for help, but because her silence touched a part of him that understood loss and quiet suffering. He believed that people often bury the most painful memories under the things they once loved, and he sensed this was true for Sandra. He decided he needed to look deeper into her past, but he planned to do it with utmost respect and kindness. Later that afternoon, Keanu visited one of Sandra's old friends who lived a short drive away. She recognized him instantly and welcomed him with warmth and curiosity. When he gently asked her about Sandra's art life, she hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a soft, emotional tone. She said Sandra once painted every day with passion and joy. She said Sandra's studio used to be the brightest room in her home. She explained that Sandra worked for years on a single portrait that meant everything to her, a portrait of someone who brought light into her darkest days, but she never finished it. One night the portrait disappeared from her easel and Sandra stopped painting forever. Keanu listened with full attention, trying to piece together the emotional puzzle. He did not interrupt her because every detail mattered. The friend said no one knew where the portrait went or why Sandra locked her brushes away. She said it was like watching someone lose a part of themselves overnight. She added that Sandra never spoke about it again and avoided all conversations about painting after that moment. Keanu felt a deep ache in his chest because he understood what that kind of silence meant. He thanked the friend and left with more questions than answers, but also with a stronger determination to help Sandra heal. That evening he returned to his home and sat in his living room trying to understand the connection between the wooden box, the old canvas, and the lost portrait. He believed all three were pieces of a story she had locked away, because remembering it hurt too deeply. He looked out the window as city lights flickered like distant stars, and he wondered what kind of loss could silence an artist who once painted with such devotion. Meanwhile, Sandra stood in her studio again, staring at the wooden box on the table. She felt torn between opening it and walking away from it forever. She touched the lid lightly and felt a wave of emotions she was not ready to face. She whispered that she missed someone she never mentioned, and the words felt strange leaving her lips after being unspoken for so long. She placed her hand on the box for a few seconds, then pulled it away as fear rose inside her. The brushes were not just brushes. They were memories, they were love, they were loss, and touching them meant accepting everything she had tried to forget. Keanu called her later that night just to check on her. His voice was calm and gentle. He asked if she was doing all right, and she said she was fine, but he could hear the quiet heaviness behind her words. He knew she needed support but also space. He told her she did not have to say anything she was not ready to say, and she felt her shoulders relax because he understood without forcing her to open the past. She thanked him for being kind, and he responded that kindness was the least he could offer. After the call, Sandra walked toward the living room and sat in front of the covered canvas. She pulled her knees close to her chest and rested her chin on them. She said the name of the person she lost in a whisper that only the walls could hear. The sound broke something inside her, but it also freed a part of her heart that had been trapped for years. She closed her eyes and let a single tear fall, but wiped it quickly as if she was still trying to be strong for no reason at all. Keanu could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about the story behind the missing portrait. He wondered if it was stored somewhere forgotten or if it had been taken away during a chaotic moment in her life. He wondered if finding it might bring closure or reopen wounds, but he believed that healing required truth and hiding pain only made it heavier. He whispered to himself that he would find the portrait no matter how far he had to search, because it might be the key to bringing Sandra back to her art and maybe even back to herself. As the night deepened, both of them sat awake in different homes carrying the same quiet weight. Sandra held her memories tightly while Keanu held his promise silently. Neither of them knew how the next steps would unfold, but something had already begun to change in the air around them. A shift like a faint spark waiting to ignite the deeper journey ahead. While Sandra sat near the canvas, she felt a strange feeling in her chest. It was not pain and it was not relief. It was something new, something like the beginning of courage. She did not touch the canvas yet, but she stayed near it longer than she ever had in recent years. She breathed slowly and allowed herself to feel the memory instead of running from it. Keanu sensed the same shift in his heart, even though he was alone in his house. He felt a new determination and a quiet sense of purpose. He whispered that he would help Sandra reclaim her art, and he believed that her healing would come with time, patience, and gentle support. As both of them drifted into restless sleep, the story moved one step closer to its hidden truth, and the restless night prepared them for what was waiting ahead. The next morning arrived with a soft, pale light that filled Sandra's home with a quiet calm, but her heart still felt unsettled from the night before. She walked into her studio holding a slow breath while her mind replayed old memories she wished she could silence. The wooden box stayed on the table like a living echo of her past, and the covered canvas seemed brighter than usual, as if the sunlight wanted her to face it. She touched the edge of the cloth, gently then stepped back with trembling hands. She told herself she was not ready, but something inside her whispered that hiding forever would not bring peace. Keanu woke early with a clear purpose in his mind. He believed the missing portrait held the truth behind Sandra's silence, and he needed to find it even if the search led him through forgotten places and old memories that were not his. He began by revisiting Sandra's friend, who told him about her old art projects. She gave him a list of places where Sandra once stored her paintings during her exhibitions. The list was not long, but each location felt like a piece of a puzzle waiting to be connected. Keanu thanked her with genuine gratitude and promised to handle everything with respect, because this story was not only about art, but about someone's heart. He drove to the first storage building on the list. It was small and quiet with tall shelves lined with old wooden crates covered in dust. The caretaker recognized Keanu and allowed him inside. Keanu opened each crate carefully, hoping to find the portrait Sandra abandoned years ago. He found some of her early sketches and a few bright paintings filled with joy, but not the one he was searching for. Still, he felt something while looking at her work. He saw a younger version of her. A version who painted without fear. A version who believed in colors the way others believed in prayer. He touched the side of one canvas and whispered that he hoped she would find that version of herself again someday. Meanwhile, Sandra spent her morning pacing around her house, unable to escape the feeling that something was shifting around her. She sat on her couch and held the wooden box on her lap. She opened the lid slowly and saw the brushes inside placed exactly the way they were years ago. The handles were smooth with familiar marks that carried the memory of the person who gave them to her. She held one brush gently and closed her eyes as a wave of emotions washed over her. She remembered laughter and encouragement, and a voice that believed in her more than she believed in herself. The memory made her chest hurt, but also warmed her heart in a strange, unexpected way. She put the brush back into the box because fear rose inside her again. She whispered that she was not ready to paint, but she did not explain why. Even saying it out loud made her feel guilty. She wondered if she would ever be ready, but the thought scared her even more. She placed the box gently on the table and walked away while wiping a tear that slipped down her cheek. Keanu moved to the second storage location, which was larger and older than the first. The building had tall metal doors and long hallways filled with countless crates that belonged to different artists. He spoke with the manager, who guided him to a section where Sandra's items had once been stored. The manager explained that some crates were moved years ago to clear space, but he did not remember where they went. Keanu listened carefully and asked if any records were kept. The manager nodded and opened an old, thick ledger with handwritten notes. He flipped through pages until he found one entry mentioning a crate removed from Sandra's section and transported to a private warehouse outside the city. Keanu felt a spark of hope. This could be the clue he needed. He wrote down the address and thanked the manager again. He walked back to his car with a quiet focus, as if something was guiding him. He believed he was getting closer to the portrait, even if the details were still unclear. He drove toward the warehouse while thinking about Sandra and the pain she hid so deeply. He wondered if she realized how strong she truly was despite everything she carried inside. Back at her home, Sandra tried to distract herself by cleaning and organizing different rooms, but her mind always returned to the canvas and the box of brushes. She stood in the hallway staring at the studio door. Her feet moved slowly toward it even though fear held onto her thoughts. She opened the door and stepped inside again. The room still smelled like old paint and dusty memories. She walked toward the covered canvas and placed her hand on the cloth. She whispered that she missed the person she lost, and the words felt different this time. They felt honest. She pulled the cloth slightly, but not enough to reveal the portrait beneath it. She stepped back again because her heart raced too fast. Something about the unfinished canvas frightened her in a way she could not describe. It was not the art itself, but the memory attached to it. She closed her eyes and felt a wave of sadness that she had avoided for years. She whispered that she was scared to see the face again because she feared it would break her all over. Keanu reached the private warehouse in the late afternoon. The building stood tall and quiet at the edge of the city, surrounded by old trees and fading sunlight. He knocked on the office door and spoke with the keeper, who recognized Sandra's name instantly. The keeper confirmed that a crate marked with her initials had been stored there for years without anyone claiming it. He guided Keanu through a dim hallway to the back section of the warehouse. He pointed at a wooden crate placed carefully on a shelf, as if it had been waiting for someone to return. Keanu walked closer and felt his heartbeat rise. The crate was sealed, but the tag carried Sandra's handwriting. She wrote the word fragile in small, neat letters. He opened the crate slowly, treating it with the same respect he offered every part of this journey. When he lifted the lid, he saw the portrait inside wrapped in protective material. His hands trembled slightly as he removed the wrapping. Then he saw it. The unfinished portrait. The face was soft and emotional, and even incomplete it carried a powerful presence. Brush strokes showed love, pain, hope, and loss all at once. He felt something inside him shift because he understood why this portrait mattered more than anything. It was not just art. It was a memory frozen in color. A memory Sandra could not face after losing the person who inspired it. Keanu stared at the painting for a long moment, allowing the silence to honor its depth. He whispered that he would bring it home to her, but only when the time felt right. He thanked the warehouse keeper and carried the portrait to his car with gentle, careful steps. He covered it safely and sat in the driver's seat with a deep, thoughtful breath. He realized this discovery was more than a missing piece. It was the beginning of Sandra's healing, even though she did not know it yet. He believed that facing the portrait would allow her to open the door she had closed years ago. He also believed it should be revealed only when she felt strong enough to see it. Back at her home, Sandra sat near the window, feeling a strange heaviness inside her chest. She looked at the studio door as if sensing something was shifting around her life. She whispered that something was coming, but she was not sure if it would hurt or heal. While she felt this quiet uncertainty, Keanu drove through the evening lights carrying the portrait toward his home. He planned to speak to her soon, but he needed to think carefully about how to bring this truth to her gently. The suspense grew silently around both of them. Two journeys were unfolding at the same time, one in searching for truth and one in facing the past. Both paths were moving toward each other like two colors rising toward a single stroke on a canvas. Neither of them knew how close they were to the turning point their lives were about to face. The next morning arrived with a soft gray sky that made the world feel quiet and thoughtful, and Keanu sat in his living room staring at the unfinished portrait resting against the far wall. The painting carried a gentle sadness that reached him even without knowing the full story behind it. He studied every brush stroke with careful eyes and felt a deep respect for the love Sandra once poured into this work. He knew this portrait held the truth she had been running from for so many years. He also knew she needed to face it in her own time, and with someone beside her who would not let her fall apart alone. Keanu spent several minutes thinking about how to bring this portrait back into Sandra's life. He wanted to be careful because emotional wounds were fragile even when they looked quiet from the outside. He decided not to bring it to her immediately. Instead, he planned to prepare her heart for the moment she would finally see it again. He whispered softly to himself that healing took patience, and he was willing to give her all the time she needed. Sandra woke early and sat on her couch with a sense of heaviness that felt different from the sadness she carried for years. This heaviness carried movement, as if something inside her was trying to rise to the surface. She walked into her studio again and saw the covered canvas. This time she did not turn away. She placed her hand on the cloth gently and breathed slowly. She felt the shape of the portrait beneath it and wondered if she would ever be brave enough to reveal it again. She pulled the cloth an inch, then released it quickly as fear washed over her. She walked backward and sat on a small chair, feeling her heart beat louder than her thoughts. She held the wooden box of brushes again and stared at them for a long moment. The brushes were clean and soft, but carrying them still felt like holding a goodbye she never accepted. She whispered that she missed the person who gave them to her, but saying the truth only made her chest tighten. She closed the box again and wiped her eyes before walking out of the studio. She felt tired, but also strangely awake, like she was standing on the edge of a truth she could no longer avoid. Keanu visited her in the afternoon. When she opened the door, he noticed her eyes were tired but softer than before. He stepped inside and felt the weight of the house immediately. Something in the air had changed, something quiet but heavy. He asked her how she was feeling, and she answered with a gentle voice that she was not sure. She told him she kept thinking about the brushes and the covered canvas. She avoided explaining why, but he understood without asking. He asked if he could see her studio again, and she nodded lightly. They walked inside, and Keanu glanced at the covered portrait. He wanted to reach out and remove the cloth for her, but he knew this was not the right moment. Instead, he stood near her and spoke calmly. He told her healing did not demand speed. It only required honesty. She looked down at her hands and said honesty scared her more than anything because honesty forced her to face the past. Keanu told her fear was normal, but she did not have to face it alone. Sandra stepped closer to the covered canvas, then stopped again. She looked at Keanu and asked him softly why he cared so much. He smiled gently and said he cared because people deserved to reclaim the parts of themselves they lost. He said she once painted with love and hope, and hiding that part of herself meant hiding her own heart. She felt her throat tighten, but she appreciated his words more than she could express. She whispered thank you, and he nodded quietly without saying anything else. After leaving her house, Keanu drove home and looked again at the unfinished portrait he found in the warehouse. He knew this was the moment to move forward. He could not hide the portrait forever because keeping it from her felt wrong. He needed to bring it back, but he also needed to be gentle about it. He thought deeply and decided to call her that evening. When he called her, his voice carried calm strength. He asked if she would meet him the next morning because he wanted to show her something important. She felt a sudden fear but also curiosity. She hesitated before agreeing. After the call, she sat alone in her living room wondering what he planned to show her. A strange feeling moved through her heart, something like nervousness mixed with hope, even though she did not want to hope for anything. Keanu spent the night preparing the portrait carefully. He wrapped it with soft, protective fabric and placed it near the entrance of his home. He sat beside it for a while and breathed deeply. He knew the moment Sandra saw this painting, her heart would break open again. But he believed the breaking would not destroy her. It would free her. He whispered that healing often begins where fear ends. Sandra tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to Keanu's words. She remembered the gentle way he spoke to her. She remembered how he never pushed her, but always stood close enough to offer support. She wondered if he understood how deeply she appreciated his kindness. She wondered if he realized how afraid she was of facing the past. She wondered if she was even strong enough to handle whatever he planned to reveal. As the night grew quieter, she walked into her studio once more. She removed the cloth completely this time, but kept her eyes shut. She folded the cloth in her hands while her heart raced. Then slowly she opened her eyes. The unfinished portrait stared back at her. Its incomplete strokes told the story of love and loss. She placed her hand on the edge of the canvas and felt her legs weaken. She whispered the name of the person she lost, and tears escaped her eyes before she could stop them. She cried softly, but she did not run away this time. After several minutes, she covered the portrait again and whispered that she needed strength. She felt exhausted but lighter. She walked out of the studio and closed the door behind her. She whispered that tomorrow might change everything, even though she did not know how. Keanu stayed awake late into the night. He sat near the portrait thinking about the responsibility he carried. He hoped Sandra would trust him enough to face the truth he found. He believed this moment would bring clarity to her heart, even if it came with pain. The suspense grew stronger as both of them waited for the morning. One carried fear and the other carried hope, and somewhere between them waited the truth that would change everything. The morning arrived with a pale, calm light that spread slowly across the sky, and Sandra opened her eyes before the sun fully rose. She felt a strange ache in her chest, as if her heart already knew today would bring something heavy and meaningful. She sat on the edge of her bed for several minutes trying to steady her breath. Each inhale felt deeper than the last, and each exhale shook lightly with fear she could not hide. The house felt still, but the air carried a quiet tension that wrapped around her like a silent reminder that the past was moving closer. She stood up slowly and walked toward the living room. Her steps were soft, but her thoughts raced with questions she had no answers for. She wondered what Keanu wanted to show her. She wondered if she was strong enough to face whatever waited for her. She wondered if this day would finally break the wall she had built around her memories. She whispered to herself that she could handle the truth, but the words felt fragile as they left her mouth. Keanu woke even earlier. He had barely slept, but his mind felt clear. He walked to the portrait leaning against his wall and rested his hand on the edge gently. He spoke in a soft voice filled with hope and respect. He told the painting that today it would return to the person who created it with love. He promised he would not let Sandra face this moment alone. He wrapped the portrait again with soft cloth and placed it carefully in the back of his car. Every movement he made was slow and deliberate, as if each action carried meaning. The drive to Sandra's home felt long even though the roads were clear. Keanu kept glancing at the rearview mirror, making sure the portrait stayed safe. He knew this painting was not just a forgotten object. It was a missing piece of Sandra's heart. He felt the weight of responsibility growing inside him. He whispered that he hoped she would trust him when she saw the truth. He whispered that she deserved healing more than she realized. Sandra waited near the window when she heard his car arrive. She pressed her hand lightly against the glass as she watched him step out. He carried something covered with fabric, and the shape made her heart drop. She stepped back, quickly feeling her breath catch in her throat. She knew that shape too well. She knew it before he even reached the door. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet plea for strength. Keanu knocked gently. When she opened the door, he smiled softly and asked if he could come inside. She nodded without speaking. Her voice felt trapped behind her fear. He stepped into the living room and placed the covered object against the wall with great care. He stood beside it silently, giving her time to breathe before saying anything. She stared at the shape without moving. Her hands curled slightly as if she was preparing for impact. Keanu spoke in a quiet, steady tone. He said he found something that belonged to her. He said he believed she deserved to see it again. He said he understood how sensitive this moment might be. She looked at him with wide, emotional eyes and asked him how he found it. He explained the entire journey from visiting old storage buildings to discovering the private warehouse. His voice remained calm and respectful as he described each step. She listened carefully, feeling her heart break and rebuild with every detail. When he finished speaking, she covered her mouth with her hand as tears formed in her eyes. She whispered that she thought the portrait was gone forever. He replied that some things wait for us even when we give up on them. She cried quietly, not because the pain returned, but because his kindness reached a place she had kept locked for too long. He stepped closer but did not touch her. He allowed her to choose how close she wanted him to be. She finally nodded slowly and asked him to uncover the painting. Her voice trembled like a soft, fragile thread barely holding together. Keanu held the cloth gently and removed it slowly, revealing the unfinished portrait beneath it. The room felt still, as if the world paused to honor the moment. Sandra stared at the painting, and her breath escaped in a trembling sigh. Her knees weakened, and she lowered herself onto the couch. The portrait looked exactly as she remembered. The soft lines, the warm colors, the emotion painted into each stroke. The incomplete face looked back at her with a tenderness that once brought her joy and now brought her grief. She whispered the name of the person in the portrait, and her voice broke. The room felt full of memories she tried to bury for years. Memories of love, memories of loss, memories of promises she never fulfilled. Keanu knelt beside her but kept a small, respectful distance. He told her she did not need to explain anything unless she wanted to. He said her pain was real and her silence was valid. She wiped her eyes and whispered that the person in the painting was her mentor and her closest friend. She said he believed in her art more than anyone else. She said he encouraged her to paint a portrait of him as a reminder of their connection. She said she promised she would finish it one day. Her voice shook as she continued. She explained that the night he passed away, she was working on the portrait. She said she could not finish it after receiving the news. She said her heart shut down and every brush stroke felt like reopening a wound she could not bear. She took the portrait off the easel and placed it aside before leaving the studio for the last time. She packed her brushes away that same night. She said she was scared that finishing the painting would mean accepting that he was truly gone. Keanu listened without interrupting. Every word she spoke felt like a piece of her heart being freed. He told her gently that grief often hides inside the things we avoid. He said she did not fail her mentor. He said love never disappears even when the person does. She cried again, but this time the tears carried release instead of fear. He asked if she wanted some time alone with the portrait. She shook her head and whispered that she did not want to face it alone anymore. He nodded with a soft smile. He stayed beside her quietly while she looked at the painting with both sadness and gratitude. She whispered that she wished she could feel strong enough to paint again. He told her strength was already inside her. He said she had carried this pain for years, and surviving it made her stronger than she believed. After several minutes, she stood slowly and walked closer to the portrait. She touched the edge with trembling fingers and breathed deeply. She whispered that she missed her mentor, and she hoped he would forgive her for abandoning the painting. Keanu stood up and walked beside her. He said forgiveness was not needed because love does not demand perfection. She closed her eyes and felt his words settle in her heart like gentle light. She turned to him with soft, emotional eyes and asked him why he tried so hard to help her. He answered in a sincere voice that kindness mattered. He said seeing someone lose a part of themselves and doing nothing felt wrong. He said he cared about her and wanted her to find peace again. His voice carried humility and respect, and his presence felt like a quiet place where she could finally breathe. Sandra took a deep breath and whispered that she wanted to paint again one day. She said she was not ready yet, but the fear no longer controlled her. Keanu smiled with calm warmth and told her he would stand by her side whenever she chose to begin. He believed she would finish the portrait when her heart was ready, and he believed it would heal the wound she carried for so long. The room felt lighter than before, not free of pain but free of silence. Sandra looked at the brushes in the wooden box and touched one gently. Her hand trembled, but she did not look away. She whispered that maybe tomorrow she would hold the brush again. Keanu nodded with quiet understanding. He knew this was her first step toward healing, and he felt grateful to witness it. As the day faded and the evening light entered the room, she stood beside the portrait with a calm expression. She no longer ran from the memory. She no longer hid from the truth. She whispered that she was ready for the next step, even if she did not know what it would be. Keanu looked at her with admiration. He knew the moment she faced the portrait was the moment her heart began to mend. The journey was not over, but the hardest part had begun to soften. Tomorrow would bring the next turning point. Suspense settled gently in the air, hinting that something deeper was coming, something that would shape the final chapter of her healing. The next morning arrived with a soft breeze drifting through Sandra's open window, and she woke with a calmer heart than she expected. She lay still for a moment, staring at the quiet ceiling above her, while the warm sunlight slowly reached across the room. Something about this morning felt different. The heaviness that once pressed against her chest felt lighter now. Not gone, but gentler, as if grief itself had learned to breathe beside her instead of crushing her. She sat up slowly and whispered that today might be the day she finally tried again. She walked into the living room where the unfinished portrait stood against the wall exactly where Keanu placed it. She looked at it with steady eyes and noticed that for the first time it did not scare her. Instead, it brought a feeling she had long forgotten, a feeling of connection, a feeling of gratitude. She walked closer to the painting and placed her hand gently on the edge. She whispered good morning as if speaking to an old friend who had been waiting patiently. She took a deep breath and felt her heartbeat grow peaceful. Keanu arrived a short while later carrying 2 cups of warm tea. When Sandra opened the door, he noticed a softness in her expression that had not been there before. He stepped inside quietly and handed her the tea. She thanked him with a small smile and told him she felt strangely calm today. He returned the smile with gentle warmth and said calm was a sign that healing had begun. She nodded slowly because the truth of his words settled gently inside her heart. They walked into the studio together and stood before the portrait. Keanu watched her carefully but respectfully. He could feel the moment unfolding with delicate emotion. He asked her softly if she wanted him to stay or give her space. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment and whispered that she wanted him to stay. She said she felt stronger when he stood beside her. He nodded and moved closer without speaking another word. His presence felt grounded and safe, like a quiet anchor she could hold on to. She opened the wooden box and lifted one of the brushes with shaky hands. The familiar weight of it filled her with emotion so strong she almost put it back. But this time she held on to it. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered the name of her mentor. She told him she hoped he knew she never stopped caring even when she stopped painting. She opened her eyes again and breathed deeply. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, not to guide her but to reassure her that he was there. She dipped the brush into a soft color she once loved. Her hand trembled as she lifted the brush toward the portrait. For a moment her vision blurred with tears, but she let them fall. She whispered that she was ready. She touched the canvas with a gentle stroke. The moment felt like opening a window after years of darkness. One soft stroke that carried love and grief and courage all at once. Keanu watched her with admiration because he knew how much strength lived inside that single motion. The room felt different now, brighter, warmer, filled with something new. Sandra continued painting slowly and intentionally. Each stroke brought a little more life back into the portrait and a little more peace back into her heart. She worked for several minutes before stepping back with a shaky breath. She whispered that she felt like she could finally breathe again. Keanu smiled softly and told her she just took the bravest step of her life. She wiped her tears and looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. She thanked him for finding the portrait, for believing in her, for walking beside her when she felt too weak to walk alone. Her voice carried deep sincerity. She said she never thought she would paint again, but he brought her back to the part of herself she thought she lost forever. Keanu listened quietly. He did not speak for a moment because her words held such powerful emotion. Finally, he told her he was honored to help her reclaim her art, and that kindness was something the world needed more of. They sat down together on the studio floor for a quiet moment. Sandra leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He did not move or speak. He simply let her rest. The silence between them felt healing instead of heavy. After a while, she whispered that she felt closer to her mentor than she had in years. Keanu told her the love she shared with him lived inside her every day, and painting again was a way to honor that love rather than fear it. She lifted her face and looked at the portrait again. It was still unfinished, but now it glowed with new meaning. She whispered that she would finish it soon. Keanu nodded with a warm, quiet smile. He believed her. He believed she would finish the portrait not out of obligation, but out of love. The light in the room shifted gently as the sun moved higher. Sandra stood again and looked around the studio with fresh eyes. She saw possibility where she once saw pain. She saw hope where she once saw fear. She whispered that the room finally felt alive again. Keanu stepped beside her and agreed. She told him softly that she felt alive again, too. Time passed quietly as they talked about her plans. She wanted to reopen her studio one day. She wanted to paint new stories. She wanted to honor the memory of the person she lost by living fully instead of living in silence. Keanu supported every dream she shared. He told her she had a gift that deserved to shine again. She felt her heart warm at his kindness. She whispered that she did not know how to thank him. He replied that her healing was thanks enough. When the afternoon arrived, they stood in front of the portrait one last time. Sandra placed her hand gently against the frame and whispered a promise to finish it. She turned toward Keanu with soft, shining eyes. She told him that he brought her brushes back, but he also brought her back to herself. He smiled with humility and said the strength was always hers. He only helped her see it. They walked out of the studio together, and Sandra closed the door not with fear but with peace. She carried the brush in her hand and felt proud instead of scared. Today was the beginning of something new, something hopeful, something gentle. The journey that began with silence ended with courage. The story that started with loss ended with love and respect. Sandra found her art again. She found her voice again. She found her light again. And Keanu stood beside her not as a savior, but as a friend who believed in the quiet power of kindness. Their hearts carried peace as the day ended, and the world around them felt bright and full of meaning.